It's going live on YouTube.
Perfect.
Madam, over to you.
So I'll begin, Ron.
Yes.
It's already 15:57. So, hello and a very good evening to the workshop organized by MNET. MNET has put together a series of workshops for teachers and educators by leading experts in the field as part of ELT to explore some of the core competencies using innovative tools and techniques. My warm welcome to the speaker, Dr. Ron Morrain, and all the educators who have gathered from different parts of India and different corners of the world. Your participation ignites and motivates us to push for better planning. And what binds us is a passion, a common passion, to be effective teachers, educators, and research scholars who constantly try to upgrade themselves as an English language teacher. And moreover, it's great to have a fraternity of teachers in India and abroad who are always ready to collaborate and share their ideas, experiences, knowledge, and best expertise to help build this community of practice. I thank the speaker, Dr. Ron Morrain, who at one call agreed for this workshop. So without wasting much time, let me begin the session. Today's workshop is on task-based learning and project-based learning using mind maps for the new normal. You may have heard task-based learning and project-based learning and may have even heard of the concept of mind mapping. But it is only when you start using them together in the classroom that you discover how they can open up a completely new world of teaching and learning possibilities. The webinar explains the why and how of incorporating task-based learning and project-based learning and mind mapping into your assortment of teaching strategies and approaches in an easy to follow format. Task-based learning or project-based learning together with mind mapping can change the way you manage a classroom learning cycle and transform the way you approach a huge variety of topics in the ELT classroom. TPL and PBL challenges learners to move to higher levels of thinking while helping them to develop 21st century skills like problem solving, decision making, and teamwork skills. Most importantly, TPL and PBL, when fully completed, guarantees the acquisition of new language and knowledge along the way because of the formative feedback loops which are conducted at intervals. Ready-made mind maps are the key to managing any task-based learning or project-based learning cycle, and they give learners an overview of the curriculum right from the start. And to unfold more about it, we have with us a most eminent personality, a versatile personality, Dr. Ron Morrain. To talk about him, his biodata is very huge. Dr. Ron Morrain is an American, and he's from Houston and currently lives in and works in Germany. He's a co-founder and director of studies at the Language Learning Centers Europe, which is headquartered in Duisburg, Germany. He has been working as an educational consultant and business English trainer for over 20 years internationally. Dr. Ron speaks 3 languages fluently, English, German, and Spanish, but get along with several other languages as well. He is the innovator of the graphic felicitation concept of ready-made mind maps that promotes learning teaching methodologies, example task-based learning and project-based learning, content and language integrated learning and content-based instruction. Language coaching session for L2 and L1 learners are also facilitated by our ready-made mind maps. Dr. Ron started promoting this concept in the mid-90s in Germany and has since been promoting the concept at conferences, universities, teachers' workshops, and webinars internationally. He is also the founder of the Business English Special Interest Group, Basic Russia, which had its debut in Moscow in 2019. He has worked on personal development and education related projects in Houston, New York, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., USA, Mexico City, Hong Kong, London, Glasgow, Geneva, Zurich, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, Brussels, Belgium, Paris, France, Vienna, Austria, Valletta, Berlin, Bonn, Duisburg, Stuttgart, and many more countries, Osaka, Nagoya, Fuki, Sendai, Morocco, Japan, Cairo, Egypt. Is a Relo Mentor Program, US Department of State, Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. And Ron works with many Fortune 500 and DAX company as a consultant or a coach for organizational learning and knowledge management, corporate language and communication training, development, design, implementation, and assessment. Ron is an active member of the following teachers organization: ELTA, Germany, that is English Language Teachers Association; ITFL, England, International Association of Teaching English as a Foreign Language; BELTA, Belgium, Belgium English Language Teachers Association; TESOL, France; TESOL, Greece. As a regular speaker at conference, Ron has conducted workshops, talks, webinars internationally, promoting the idea of task-based learning, problem-based learning, and mind mapping in second language learning and teaching. Dr. Ron describes himself as a seasoned traveler, a wit art collector, and a lifelong learner. In his free time, he enjoys walks with his dog, team cooking, and sharing interesting conversation with friends, playing DJ for an international teachers group, and trying out his singing talents at his favorite local pub. We are honored by your presence, sir, and once again, I welcome you. I request, sir, to take the session ahead. The Zoom platform is all yours.
Thank you, Renu. And before we get started, can everybody see the screen there? Yeah, can you see that, Renu?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay, thank you for that long introduction, but I would just like to add two things. Yes, I am a member of many teachers organizations and would love to become a member of your teachers organization. Thank you very much for inviting me here today to be with your teachers organization and with teachers from all over the world. And again, let's just get right to it, okay? We're going to talk today about task-based learning, TBL and PBL, using ready-made mind maps and for the new normal. And when we say the new normal, we're talking about really online learning, okay? That's just sort of implied in that title right there. So, you know, I would just like to start by getting to one of my I consider him to be a mentor, and I met him actually at a workshop in England. Okay, I was in Harrogate, and I got to meet Sugata Mitra, and you know, his talk was so inspiring that it really made me think about. Take a few steps back and think about what I'm doing in the classroom. I felt so inspired, but he also caused a little bit of controversy. But I have to say that that was good controversy because it made us as teachers really take a step back and think about what we're doing in that classroom. Well, what did he say? It's the teacher's job to point young minds toward the right kind of questions. And a teacher doesn't need to give any answers because there's answers everywhere. And when we're talking about online learning, we need to use the resources that are online. But we also have to create sort of an organization and structure to get our students to go to the right place and really optimize that online learning experience. Now, while Professor Mitra never talked about online learning at the time, times have changed, and we do need to really take a few steps back and think about what we're doing in that online learning experience. Well, we're talking here about task-based learning, and I would just like to give a quick, background about task-based learning. Well, task-based learning actually, became very popular around the world when Jane Willis wrote her book, A Framework for Task-Based Learning in 1996. And I have to say that the book was very interesting for me because I never really thought about, some of the things that she had said, but it really wasn't Jane Willis Space Learning. It was an Indian professor, okay, who in 1987 came out with a book. And I was working in the corporate world at that time. And I realized that actually that's what I had been doing all along. But then we go a little bit deeper than that and a little bit, more into history. And we see that, task-based learning is not new. It's been around for centuries. And, we might not didn't have that name at the time, but from a psychological perspective and, looking at it, pedagogically, we can say that, task-based learning and project-based learning is really a little bit like cognitive apprenticeship. Now, if that word is, or that term is new for you, why don't you Google that to see what that really is? And I'm going to give you some examples of that today. But, task-based learning has come a long way since Professor Pabu introduced that in 1987, and then Jane Willis in 1996. And it's developed into too many different things. And now we see that there's a lot of different flavors of task-based learning today. I've traveled the world and seen how different teachers are using it, the different terminologies that they use, and the different goals that they might have. And one of the ideas is that that task-based learning should come to an outcome, but that leaves the term outcome very open. And I had to make a decision very early in my teaching career when I first started using task-based learning at the business university that I was working at. And I had to define for myself that an outcome would really mean that my students and my learners were creating a product. And we're going to get into that, what really a product is, when we talk a little bit deeper here about task-based learning and or TBL and PBL. Well, I want to talk about 13 reasons really quick here about why maybe task-based learning and project-based learning works in language learning. And the one thing that, and I really put that at the top, is, and it's a priority, is that with task-based learning and project-based learning, we're able to flip the classroom, and it helps to drive the learning cycle with a meaningful goal. And we're going to talk about what the definition of a meaningful goal is. And that now, let me take a step back in how I first started. It was always my face-to-face classes, but I have been able over the years to see this because I have been using it for many, many years now in my online learning as well. And it does work and helps to add that structure and helps to flip that classroom. And the second thing is it changes the learning dynamics. When we're using task-based learning, we realize that, we do take a step back as teachers. Many cultures are very teacher dominated and oriented, but TBL is student oriented and it should be learner driven. And we'll talk about how do you get those students to really take the responsibility of their own learning and for their own self-development. It also helps to promote skill sets that the students bring to the table, but it also helps to create new skills and develop new skills. In this case right here, I'm just going to simplify it, but I think some of the most important skills that students need to be learning is, the research skills and curation skills and content creation. And TBL and PBL help students to be the creators of content instead of the teachers being the creators of content. And it helps to promote the 4 C's of learning. And if you don't know what the 4 C's are, you can Google it. 4, it incorporates the concept of montage into the learning concept. Now, you know, I was always interested in how great writers and great producers of films, you know, put those things together and what techniques they used to put that together. But it wasn't until, and that was just sort of a fluke. But I went to the YouTube and found an interview from Alfred Hitchcock. And the interviewer was asking him, you know, what he attributed to his success in his films. And he used the word montage. And I found it very interesting because if we look back at what that really is, isn't that what we're really doing in the classroom? We're designing a lesson, we're chunking it, and we're leading to sort of storyboarding so that the students put it, we're doing that in our lesson plan. So Alfred Hitchcock put design, chunking, scaffolding, and storyboarding all into one word, and he used that as montage. And, you know, TBL and PBL also helps to deal with, you know, personal learning preferences that students bring to the table, and us as teachers to respect the difference that that preference that students bring in and give them all an equal chance to use the skills and ideas and also preferences that they have in the learning cycle. The next thing is it helps to deal with differentiated learning. And, you know, I always say, you know, from a personal perspective, my personal teaching history, is that I always found differentiated learning to be one of the most difficult things for me as a teacher to, you know, to deal with. But it was when I started dealing with integrating TBL and PBL into my, you know, teaching approach and in the classroom that I realized that it actually made it easier to deal with the different language levels and the social capital that my students brought into the classroom and helped to overcome some of the socioeconomic differences and diversity that was inside the classroom and helped me to really include everyone in the process. And the seventh thing there, it helps to take advantage of experiential learning as well too. Now, when you're dealing with young learners, we always assume that maybe they don't have that much to say when it comes to life experience. But my experience has been that they do have something to say. And it's so, but in turn, if you're doing TBL and PBL right, it actually creates life experiences for the student. It creates know-how for them, and it also creates new skill sets. And number 8, it keeps learners focused and result oriented. You know, sometimes learners get lost in the learning cycle and they don't know what's really going on. And there's questions of mystery. What is this leading to? And using ready-made mind maps in the TBL and PBL cycle helps to keep all the eyes of the students on the goal of the learning cycle. And number 9, it leads learners to self-directed learning, which should be the goal of all of us as teachers to, you know, what are we doing to create independent learners, self-directed learners? And TBL and PBL are definitely those methodologies that we could be integrating to lead our students to self-directed learning and help them to take responsibility for their own learning results. Number 10, it puts life into the course book. Now, I as a teacher know that we do have to have course books, but we can learn to supplement those course books and fill in the blanks and the gaps that the course books are not covering. And TBL and PBL is such a great way to do that fill in and gap exercise, that gap that the books don't cover. Number 11, it gets away from predetermined outcomes and prescribed grammar. Now, if we really look at what's going on in some of the course books, the grammar is pre-given and we teach it, you know, in chunks. We'll do the present simple and then the past simple or the present continuous, but that's not how life works. That's not how language works. And we need to get away from the predetermined outcomes that the books want us to fulfill. And this is one of the things why one of the reasons why teachers love a lot of course books, because it tells them everything that they have to do, and that's great. That's what publishers do well. But at the same time, life doesn't work that way. Learning shouldn't work that way. We can't always determine what's really going to come out. And this is maybe one of the setbacks that teachers might have to TBL and PBL, is because they cannot, determine what the outcome will be. But that's the surprises that come with TBL and PBL. And it teaches learners how to deal with task and how to deal with PBL, and PBL also means a problem-based learning. And here we're preparing them for real life, because once they enter the work world, they will have to tackle tasks on a daily basis, and they will have to become problem solvers. So it's our job. It's one of our responsibilities as teachers. And again, this is my personal opinion, that we should be preparing them for what they're going to enter, what they're going to confront when they enter the work world. And the last point here is that it helps us as teachers to make that slow change, that transition from instructivism to constructivism. And when I throw that word out there, a lot of people get surprised. Well, what is that? What is instructivism and constructivism? Well, we're teachers and we do instruct. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't. Please don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that we do need to understand the differences between instructivism and constructivism. And when do we instruct and when do we take a couple of steps back and let the students construct from what we've been doing in the learning cycle in our classroom. And instructivism is simply put here, and I've sort of kind of changed this definition to fit what I see in the differences between the two, is that it's very institutional and teacher-centered, where the policymakers or the power holders, in this case, sometimes the teachers, are the ones who control the process of learning and the resources and the conditions for a learner's success, where the learners just become end users of the predetermined outcomes. And the stakeholders, the learners themselves, are sometimes not part of that final decision-making process. So learner agency is actually suppressed when we just take a complete instructivist approach to our teaching practice in the classroom. Whereas in the opposite and would be constructivism is when, it's asking teachers to take a step aside, 2 steps back, take on a new role, because, we have many different roles in the classroom. And TBL and PBL requires teachers to become a facilitator of the learning process and a coach during the learning process. And there's many different ways to do that. And that was one of the reasons that led me to create the concept of ready-made mind maps, where we pair students and let them work collaboratively. And we want students in that constructive, learning process to be the creators of content, instead of us giving them the content from a book or copies or whatever. We let them create the content, and they're able at the end to see that it's meaningful for them. Now, the last thing I want to say about constructivism is that it does require us to change the way we manage our classrooms. And it does require a different kind of classroom management skills. And that will definitely come to the forefront as we start to integrate TBL and PBL into our classroom practice. Well, traditional approaches, and I have nothing against traditional approaches. I'm been teaching for over 30 years. And when I first started, we approached it from language learning, from, the 4 skills of speaking, writing, listening, and reading. But, if we start to integrate TBL and PBL into our learning, approach in the classroom, or teaching practice in the classroom, we will see how differently we can approach these basic skills. But there's other skills that also need to be incorporated when we're doing TBL and PBL, and those are the 4 C's. which is, 21st century skills. And the 4Cs are collaboration. TBL and PBL is a great way to start getting that collaboration between our students. And when I say collaboration, I mean collaboration between the students. Yes, there's going to be collaboration between the teacher and the students groups, but we really want to push that to the forefront where students are learning to collaborate with each other, which, means a little bit of teamwork. And teamwork is a skill that is something that they learn during TBL and PBL. We want creativity, we want communication, and we want critical thinking as well too. Again, Google these terms right here for a little bit more detail about what they are. Now, another thing that with TBL and PBL is that, we as teachers have to get an understanding of really what project-based learning is and what's really happening from that. Because if they're going to enter the work world, they will be put into projects and they'll have to understand what's going to be required of them. Again, they'll need to collaborate. They will need to form partnerships in communities, sometimes communities that practice online. They will deal with feedback and revision. They will deal with publicly presented products that will be coming out of PBL. But why don't we just take the step and integrate TBL and PBL into our teaching practice in the classroom and teach them how to do that now, so in the future they're prepared. It will require some reflection, and they will also be the creators of content and the skills of how to create content. And we're dealing with real world tasks, realia, as we say. And there we also see a point of inquiry. We're teaching them the inquiry-based approach during the TBL and PBL practice, because, asking the right questions, as Professor Mitra said, that is what really leads to curiosity, interest, motivation, and students seeking out and discovering new knowledge as they go through the TBL and PBL cycle. Well, there's other things that we deal with in understanding the values of PBL, and this is also TBL too. We're teaching students about time management. We're teaching them to multitask. We're teaching them communication skills, and we're not teaching them because they're going to be learning this by themselves and with each other. They'll be learning how to become more detail oriented. They'll learn to be more organized and deal with problem solving and also teamwork. You can't have TBL and PBL if you don't have inquiry-based learning. That is just a given when we're doing this. And sometimes we don't really think about that as teachers. But I can't go into what really inquiry-based approach learning is, but I can say that it does scare some teachers. But in actuality, when we look at it, we can see that it makes our job easier as teachers when we ask the right questions and challenge our students with questions. And there's different kinds of questions. And the kind of question that I'm saying, here is engaging questions, questions that will lead our students to want to do work and motivate them to do something. And in turn, they will see the value for themselves. And another thing that we have to think about when we're talking about TBL and PBL is a question we have to ask ourselves as teachers, is what is my TPAC? The TPAC is an acronym for technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. And again, please Google this because you can get a more detailed definition of what TPAC is. But, online learning today, as we know it in this new normal, if you don't have your TPAC right, it might not work. And we might see ourselves just being instructive as teachers, but the new normal requires us to be very constructivist in our approaches to online learning. And that does mean that we do have to take a step back and see, do we have a healthy balance between pedagogy, content knowledge, and technology? So again, ask yourself the question, what is my TPAC? And do I have a healthy balance between pedagogy, content, and technology? Well, that leads us to what we really are doing. What's really happening in that TBL and PBL cycle? Well, you know, if we use a ready-made mind map to guide that, and that's the driving force within that cycle to give us organization and structure and to remove those questions of mystery, you know, the ready-made mind maps will give direction. It will challenge students to see the potential that they have, and we as teachers will also discover that that our students have a lot more to give than sometimes we're actually, you know, giving them credit for. We're going to support them through that cycle. We're going to become coaches, and we're going to take them out of their comfort zone slowly but surely and lead them into another world. We're going to stay goal oriented, because we always have to remember that all TBL and PBL cycles are, you know, goal oriented. They do have a goal. And sometimes as teachers, we have to, you know, if we're expecting our students to, you know, give a PowerPoint presentation, maybe not all of our students know how to work with PowerPoint. And that's when we become trainers. We're no longer teachers or coaches or facilitators. We become trainers, because trainers help people to learn new skills. So sometimes we're going to have to teach them how to do that. And that might slow down the TBL cycle or the PBL cycle, but that's okay. Now, during all of this, you will start to see for yourself, you will witness this, you will observe it, how students become motivated because they're being challenged. They're given, they're able to start getting a feeling of efficacy, of success. And during this, we talk about those feedback loops, that formative feedback that we need to be giving students along the way. Don't wait until the end to give them feedback. Jump in every now and then and give them some feedback. Make them feel good. Students want that feedback, and that helps them to redirect themselves, reorient themselves in order to reach the goal that we have set for them or that they have set for themselves. And in the end, they're able to feel a sense of success. And we as teachers should acknowledge that. And TBL and PBL help to do all of these things that are happening during that learning cycle. But there is another thing, and that is, are we leading our students to be self-directed? Because that's what TBL and PBL should be about. That might not be a dynamic that's going to be happening with a course book. So ask yourself, am I doing, what am I doing in the classroom? What methodologies, what approaches am I using that could lead my students to become self-directed? Because with the new normal, online learning, remote, you know, learning, whatever you want to call it, self-directed learning becomes one of the most important aspects, because we can't be there for them all the time. We can't observe them, but if we give them challenges, they will slowly learn to be self-directed. And I always use this picture right here to talk about really what self-directed learning is. And if we see ourselves as that teacher in the classroom who are leading our students to new knowledge and the development of new skills, you know, just picture yourself in a car. Eventually, you're going to lead those students to want to be behind the steering wheel, to want to self-direct themselves, to want to use that knowledge and that those skills that we're giving them, and they want to show us that. But we have to have a way to manage that. Here we see a teacher letting the student, he gives them the keys, puts them in the car and tells them, okay, we talked about all the theory of driving. It's your chance to drive now. They want that. They look forward to that. And again, TBL and PBL is the way to get them into the driver's seat, because that is what really independent and self-directed learning is all about. Well, that is my sort of lead in to what I feel could get you to an understanding of what I'm talking about when it comes to TBL and PBL. Now, I want to just show you some of the mind maps that I work with, but before I do that, I want to talk about we have to teach learners how to work with mind maps, how to work with TBL and PBL. And that might be difficult for them, especially from the cultural aspect of that they come from a culture, and that includes everybody around the world, where the teacher is the driving force, the teacher is the center of everything. And all of a sudden you're asking students to take over, you're putting them in the driver's seat. Well, that might not be an easy transition for students. It's not an easy transition for teachers, but it definitely won't be an easy transition for the students either if we don't teach them how to work with mind maps and ready-made mind maps. So I always start very simple. I give them a little mind map. It's a worksheet. I put it on the board and I let them just look at it. But I'm going to ask them a driving question. I'm going to ask them an engaging question that will make them think. Now, in order to get them to understand the process, I don't want to give them too much theory. So what I want to show you here is a classroom, and that chalkboard that you see there is a PBL project that I was working on with some of my Chinese students. I went into the classroom and I asked the students I was working.
Ron, can you unmute yourself? Dr. Ron? Dr. Ron? Dr. Ron, can you unmute yourself? Dr. Ron, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, okay. Perfect.
Mm.
Okay, do I just go back one slide?
No, this slide only, a little,
Okay.
1 minute.
Okay, perfect. Well, what you're looking at here is a group of Chinese engineering students that I had. I work with many Chinese students and many international students. But I decided that I was just going to work with a Chinese student during this project. They are engineering students, and I wanted to introduce TBL and PBL to them. And our project was going to be to design the car of the future. And what I did was I gave them the mind map and we brainstormed all the questions. And what you see there is a chalkboard that I had in the classroom, getting the students to brainstorm the questions that we were going to have to answer in designing this car of the future. And you can see here as the different stages, you're looking at what the students wrote down in their notebook, and then we get them to move to start creating that project and designing that, working in groups. We have different groups here, how they're getting involved and becoming very creative. I have music playing in the background. They always bring something to drink and eat. We eat together in our classroom. And you can see that some of them get very motivated, get on top of the table, and they really get into the project. But let's not forget that what that, TBL and PBL learning cycle is all about is creating a product. In this case right here, you can see the students already putting their poster on the walls, and the room was just filled with posters because the students will have to present their product. TBL and PBL is about creating a product. And well, what is a product? It could be anything. In the case that I just showed you, it was some students designing the car of the future, but they would have to present that in class. We let them use anything that they wanted to do. They could have done it on PowerPoint. They could have done it. But in this case, I asked them to do it on a poster, to remove some of the technology and let them be a little bit more creative and not concentrate on just the technology of PowerPoint. I suggest that all teachers use that method in the beginning instead of just throwing them of the product of using a PowerPoint when they're doing TBL and PBL. Now, when we're doing this right here and we're designing the car of the future, I want all the teachers to take a step back before they do this TBL and PBL learning cycle, before they start it, is that we have to use the concept of backward design. In other words, what is this TBL and PBL cycle going to lead to? What are we going to ask them to do? Well, that leads us to right here is actually just using the ready-made mind maps as the driving force for PBL. And we do have to start somewhere. And what I do is I always start them with this ready-made mind map. You know, students are able to talk about these things. I send this to them before. They have it either through the Moodle groups that I work with, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, depending on the social media that we're going to use. Because again, we're talking about online learning in the new normal. And we use technology in every way that we can to get messages and manage that TBL and PBL cycle. The first time I ever meet students is I want them to talk about, you know, learning in and of itself and how do they learn, and that metacognitive process that we have to get going there, getting them to reflect and asking them engaging questions. So they first see a mind map and they start to learn with it. And I'm able to interact with my students using a ready-made mind map to guide that conversation and that warm-up session that we're going to have before I actually introduce a TBL or PBL cycle to them. And this is one of the first ones that I use in class right here. I want the students, now this is taking an experiential approach where I ask the students to really think about and reflect and become introspective about their community and the world that they live in, because it's about their world. So I use this mind map right here. You can see that it is chunked. That's what the bubbles and the numbers are all at. The numbers give the students the order and the structure and organization that they need. But what they don't see here is the actual product itself. They don't see that, and they don't see this mind map until we've done a warm-up session or an activity beforehand. So the ready-made mind maps do not include the warm-up activity and do not include the product itself. That's something that we as teachers know is there, and we can use our own creativity, and we know our students and we know what works and what doesn't work for the warm-up activity and what will work as a product. So here I want to show you that maybe how this is, I actually took a picture of what my students were doing during this. I gave them the ready-made mind map at number 1. I sent it to them on Moodle, but they also have it on their telephone. In number 3, the student printed that out, but the student doesn't have to print that out because we use technology today and they can use it. They can just use their telephone to have access to that. What the student decided to do in number 4 was, because we were using English, the student decided that they were going to translate that and write it because they wanted to integrate that psychomotor aspect of learning. And so they rewrote the mind map so that they could just use it to guide themselves. And they wanted to make it a little bit easier. What they did was they researched the questions to that mind, the answers to the questions that I gave them. They wrote them down on a Word document, but that wasn't the task. The task was for them to write a 250-word essay on that. That was one of the tasks. There are many different tasks that we can, products that they can create. And you can see in number 6, they wrote their draft and what they turned into me was their notebook. So everybody gave me their notebooks and then I could check it. But what happened here is I didn't use a course book. I allowed the students to go and research the answers to the engaging questions that I asked them. So here you see that whole process working right here with this photo. Now, there are other things that we can do to still make it experiential in nature, because we should start with more, you know, their world, what they know already, instead of just throwing new experiences to them. That will come a little bit later because we scaffold and we use increased complexity as we're doing this right here. So we let them talk about their favorite eatery, you know, bistro or restaurant. I'm dealing with young learners here, university students. I'm also dealing with business students as well too, and adult learners. And people can talk about food. They can talk about their favorite place. They just need the language to do that. Here we give them a little bit of vocabulary to work with. It's chunked. It's scaffold, so it leads in, it's in a very, these are all researched, and it leads them to create the language step by step, but the goal here is to get them to create a product. So here we can say that one student decided to do an interview with an Italian restaurant and videotape that and show us that of, you know, his favorite Italian restaurant. Another student decided to do a restaurant review and send it to the newspaper. So here we let voice and choice happen. Let the students choose what the product's going to be. And then of course, we'll think about how we're going to assess that product. But here we involve task-based learning, project-based learning, language emergence. We talk about experiential learning. We give them the mind map as the guide, and we let them decide what they're going to actually do. But I think in the beginning, we should make it simple and let them do maybe a restaurant review and work with that genre before we start letting them do more complicated things like creating a video or something like that. Now I'm going to run you through some other ones, status symbols. Let's move them away from their world and maybe mix their world and other perspectives. Here we talk about status symbols. We do a little bit of warm up with them and see what they know about status symbols, but then we lead them in 2, 3, and 4. As you can see here, 2 talks about gender perspectives. Number 3 talks about cultural perspectives of status symbols. Number 4 has 2 perspectives. We talk about a historical perspective. We talk about a business perspective. And number 5 leads them into that personal storytelling of, you know, their own idea of status symbols. Again, we can choose the product. In this case right here, I allow my students to do whatever they want, create interviews, film them. They can write an essay if they want to, because I want them to feel creative. And all I want is that they're learning and that they're discovering new things about the topics that we're dealing with. Well, you know, everybody sleeps. You know, normally we sleep an average between 7 and 9 hours a day. Well, maybe a lot of people haven't really thought about, you know, sleep in the perspectives that's thrown at them here in this, you know, ready-made mind map. And it leads students step by step in increments to discover different things about sleep. And it gets very, very deep, but they're going to be discovering new vocabulary, new ideas about sleep. And in the end, they will be learning something new. So language learning is not the priority here in the beginning. It's actually other things as they're learning to research, because again, what Professor Mitra says, don't give the students the answers. There's enough places for them to find the answers in today's world, and they will find them if we ask good questions. And that's what ready-made mind maps are about, is asking good questions. Well, let's take them on a little deeper trip. Let them think about themselves and what is a millennial, and talk about millennials and Generation Z, and give them these key, you know, phrases and guides and engaging questions to lead them to a deeper discovery about millennials and Generation Z. If we're working with young learners, we're working with Generation Z, and let them compare that to Generation X and Y and Z, and get deeper and deeper, because we could add Generation X there as well. And this mind map leads them to that. But let us never forget, what's the warm up? What's going to be the product? When we're thinking about TBL and PBL, remember that we have to think about backwards design. And that's what the students don't see. They don't see the warm-up activity. They don't see the product. And we work that out with them when we introduce this. Media. Students want to, you know, we can use this topic. Here's a great mind map to be doing that and drive that TBL and PBL cycle. Here the students wanted to talk about fake news. And we brainstormed this together. And this was the result actually of a brainstorming in a classroom. And that was the beginning of a TBL and PBL cycle. The students absolutely loved this because, you know, when we talk about this new normal, let us not forget at the beginning, a lot of students were confused about what was real and not real, and what's the difference between fake news and what could they believe and not believe. And and you know, as we get a little bit deeper into the students' world, the students asked me one day, a couple of students asked me, what was the gig economy? Well, here I have the student throwing me an engaging question. And so I said, well, you know, let's brainstorm it. You know, what do we know about it? And the student said, well, we don't really know that much about it, but can we talk about it? So I left this mind map in its natural state that we created this in 1 hour in the classroom. I had the students research it. What did they want to know? We put all of that information into a mind map, and that led our learning cycle for 3 learning sessions. And we had students create products like videos, interviews, they interview business people, and they brought all of that into the classroom, and we shared that with one another. Again, we were all speaking English, and they were able to use all that knowledge and skills that they had gained during the learning cycle in the presentation part of that classroom. Well, students also wanted to talk to me about life, and they do want to talk about that. And this was done for a group of university students who wanted to talk about, this was an international group of students, and these students were wanting to talk about how they made the transition of moving from other countries to Germany, and what they went through, and how did it feel, what were they going through, talking about their emotions. And this is something that the students chose for themselves. And I have to say that this was a very interesting way of approaching this. Again, students having voice and choice, not only in the product, but also in the topics themselves. And again, I left this in the natural state so you could see what I, as a teacher, brainstormed with my students to allow them to decide what they wanted to learn about. Well, that leads us to really using ready-made mind maps for, you know, international communications classrooms. And what is meaningful learning? Because there is a definition of what meaningful learning is. And if we are using active learning in the classroom where it's learner oriented and learner driven, well, that's the beginning of meaningful learning. And if we're using collaboration, getting the students to learn with each other, then we're going in that direction of meaningful learning. If we're getting our students to construct and create content that leads to product creation, then we are doing meaningful learning. And if we're using authentic themes like I just showed you, and realia, then things that students see important for themselves now and in the future, then we're doing meaningful learning. And if we are doing goal-directed learning, because, you know, we got to lead our learners to reach a goal, then definitely we're doing meaningful learning. And we need mind maps sometimes to help the students make the transition to TBL and PBL, and we as teachers improve the classroom and practices, teaching practices that we're using with our learners. Well, here are some mind maps that lead. This mind map I created and has been used all over the world, actually, and been translated into different languages because it doesn't have to only be English. This mind map led to unbelievable products. Students were actually creating workshops around this, and they were my business students, but there's nothing wrong with teaching young learners business and what teamwork is. And definitely, if we see that teamwork isn't working in our classroom, throw that mind map in there, let them do this learning cycle, and that will teach them indirectly, and they will learn from their own discovery by using these engaging questions to discover what teamwork is and the importance of that skill that they will need when they enter the work world. job satisfaction. Many people don't really understand what that phenomena is. What is job satisfaction? Does it mean that I'm happy and just unhappy? Is it that simple? Or is it more complicated than that? And what engaging questions can we ask our students to lead them in that journey of discovery of not just language, but about the topic of job satisfaction. So when they do enter that world, the work world, they will understand that phenomena that they're going to be faced with when they enter the work world. What we need to teach our students, not, about, we can teach them, young learners and university students, we need to teach the skill of research and also some business and looking at business and companies from a different perspective and understanding how complicated the hierarchy of companies can be and what are they really doing, what are they not doing, what do they do well, what do they not do well. And this mind map leads them into the TBL and PBL cycle in order to actually, can we get that person to,
Misty? Hey, Misty.
can you hear me? Okay. And we want to, this is that mind map that we use, okay, to get the students to really start deeply researching. This is when we know that they're, they're getting better at research. Let's take them one step, further. Let them go really deep into that research of a company and then let them create their own product. And there's just an array of products that can be created here. We're talking about communication, and sometimes students find it very difficult to talk about themselves. So let's start them talking about themselves and get them to do a CV. We know as teachers that works, getting them to do a writing, a little exercise and product about CV, but they need a little bit of help. And this mind map helps them to do that. But the goal here is actually to start in a written form, but we want to move them to a speaking way to speak about themselves. And then we use this mind map to get them to start speaking about themselves and learning how to do an elevator pitch and filming it and letting them see themselves and thinking about, getting to the point of self-reflection, self-actualizations that they're going to go through here, self-realizations that they make about themselves before they feel happy about showing that or sharing that video with us in class. And we look at that and we see, did they follow the mind map? Did they answer all the questions? And then we use time management here to say, you have to do that in 5 minutes. That video cannot be more than 5 minutes. So we're adding a lot of challenges to them as we're actually doing that. Well, that moves us to close right here. If we're using mind maps to start the TBL learning cycle, to manage that TBL and PBL learning cycle, and using that to drive that learning, lead students to new discoveries and knowledge and language, well, we should be doing some formative assessment loops during that. And I have many of these mind maps and I want to share those with you. And that is why I said to renew today is that you will get a copy of all of these mind maps so that you can use them in your classroom. And we want to use a mind map to send to students during those formative loops, feedback loops that we need to be doing with them. And we need to ask them some questions. And here are a list of questions that we can be asking students. How do they feel about their learning? Get them, back to that we started with metacognitive process and using a mind map to do it. Well, let's use it throughout and also at the end. Because they do need a guide to help them to get to that reflection point about what's going on. What did they like? What didn't they like? What's working for them? What's not working for them? To help them to build those strategies to become more self-directed and taking the responsibility that they should be doing during the learning cycle. Well, that moves us to the end here. And I want to repeat where I started, is that if we look at this right here, Are we using TBL and PBL to flip the classroom? Are we using it to change the learning dynamics? Are we moving from Instructivism to Constructivism? And I'm not saying that we're going to become completely Constructivist or completely Instructivist, because we have to build a healthy balance between the two. And I think that's what leads to good teacher development and our own self-development, is that we learn that we have to be both, and we have to know when to teach and when to instruct and when to take 2 steps back and let our students construct. Are we promoting skill sets the students bring to the classroom? Are we dealing with the different personal learning preferences that students bring into the classroom? What about montage? Are we using that? Are we dealing with differentiated learning? Are we dealing with experiential learning? And if we use TBL and PBL and the mind maps to guide that process, then these things are going to be happening just as a matter of fact. Are we keeping our learners focused and results oriented? Are we leading them to be self-directed? Are we putting life into that course book? And are we getting away from those predetermined outcomes and prescribed grammar that the course books are giving us and directing us to do? And are we leading them to understand what TBL and PBL is and getting them ready for their future when they enter the work world? And are we slowly changing from just being instructivists in our approaches to being a good combination of both? And that is instructivist and constructivist teachers. And I would like to end with just one thing that really came to my mind. And I got excited when I first heard Professor Mitra talk in England about what he was saying. His ideas were so great. I felt so motivated. And this just stuck in my mind, is that if that excites you, but at the same time scares you, at the same time, then it probably means that you should take some risk as a teacher and just do it. Don't be afraid to take risks and make mistakes. Use the Readymade mind maps to help you to make that transition and help you to motivate your students to become self-directed and create and discover new knowledge for themselves, simultaneously giving them the language that they're going to need to feel successful, to do and meet up to the challenges that we're going to give them as teachers. I would like to thank you very much for attending today. And I would also like to say that I would like to give you the learning manual to this webinar. You can sign up for that learning manual. You can get it as a PDF if you go to this site right here. And Renew, if somebody could put that into the chat box, that would be great.
Okay.
I can actually put that into the chat box
Yes,
as we now move. And I ask everybody today here to follow me on Facebook. I don't have time to be doing a blog, but I post a lot of interesting articles and ideas about pedagogy, about methodology, about content, all these things I post on my Facebook. And I have lots of followers, and I'd like to invite you to follow me on Facebook and become part of that group of teachers all over the world who really believe in TBL and PBL, because they know that that's going to help them to become better teachers and in turn create better learners. Renew, thank you very much for inviting me today. And I'm going to turn that back over to you for hopefully some great questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ron. It was a wonderful session. I got all the 5 principles that I had learned in Dr. Prabhu's book: communication gap, goal setting, authenticity. So all these things I have learned, and the greatest learning for me today was how to use mind map. So thank you, Dr. Ron. There are a few questions that I have got. So the first question is from Bomi Sridharan, and she's saying, how can we develop task-based learning, project-based learning among students through mind mapping? That is her question, which you've already answered.
Well, let me just jump in there and say something. It's not our job in the beginning to get students to mind map in that sense. We as teachers have to understand how how TBL and PBL work. And let us not forget that the ready-made mind maps are that instrument that we use in the beginning to change from frontal teaching and integrate TBL and PBL into that, because we need some help as teachers. And that's why I created it. I created the concept of ready-made mind maps to help teachers make the change. So I would suggest that you use some of mine first, see what happens, but eventually you'll be creating your own, and then we lead to the point where we'll get the students to do it. Okay? But it's a step-by-step process that happens in increments. Use some of mine as a model, I suggest, then create some of your own, and then get the students to do them.
Yeah, it's step by step. It has to go step by step. Cannot jump on it, right? The second question is from Sarma Arayul. How to implement project-based teaching in rural and remote areas?
On Google? Could you repeat that question?
The question is how to implement project-based teaching in rural and remote areas.
Well, you know, I have been using TBL as the methodology and PBL as a methodology. And I use the ready-made mind maps. I send them to students on WhatsApp. I send them to them on Google Docs. Google Drive. I use it I use them on Zoom. They actually are the help to, to manage that learning cycle that is extremely important. So that's how I share them. And so students don't lose focus about what's going on. They can always use them and refer back to them when they're having questions about what's going on. So whatever technology you're using, you can use them. And I also suggest that you use a program called MindMeister, which is a great way to create your own mind maps that you can share with students. I share them on Facebook, in the groups. MindMeister is such a great program to be using to create the mind maps and to share with students.
Okay, then there are many questions that are popping up now. Now, Stanislaus Ayodhya, her question is, project-based learning is very famous in Canada. I just would like to know to which level of students this PBL method is successful.
TBL and PBL work at all levels. They work with primary school students. They work with secondary school students. They work with university students. They work with adult learners. So age is not the barrier there. The mind maps just have to change, okay? And TBL and PBL changes. We can't give a primary school student the same task that we would give a university student. But there are many different things that you can find on Google. When you Google it, TBL and PBL for primary school students, TBL and PBL for secondary school students, university students, adult learners. So Google's going to help you to find the answer to that one.
Okay. So I feel these questions these answers are quite relevant in this time, in this pandemic time. There's a question from Lina. She's saying, how can you work with mind maps in virtual classes? Are there any apps or web pages?
Well, I just mentioned one, and that is MindMeister. It is one of the leading mind map creation apps that you can find. It is free and comes in many different languages. There is a free version and a pay-for version. Now, I believe that is probably one of the best ones to use. I like the way that you can integrate listening into it and videos and that it's all just in one little thing, and the ability to share that with your students. So I highly recommend that you go to mindmeister.com and find that, because you're going to be surprised at all the wonderful things that you can do with that.
Yeah, and I feel from the audience, there are certain questions. So I feel Sarayu ma'am has some questions. Can you unmute and ask a question?
Did I mute somebody?
Sarayu ma'am, Sarayu Mehta ma'am, she has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, hi, I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I
we
can
can hear you.
It's a little
Yeah,
bit
hi.
loud.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Ron. Thank you for the wonderful session. It's been a real pleasure being with you. And thank you, Mrs. Renu, for presenting it to us. My question is that our students come from different walks of life. I work in the United Arab Emirates. Many students don't, are not able to converse and, kind of portray themselves in the mind mapping session. They don't know how to talk about it or discuss with their friends because of so many issues, like social issues. They don't have interaction at home. So how do we help these children out? Is it okay if we directly go and help them out? Or, how do we do that, Mr. Ron? It would be very nice of you if you could help us out with this.
I so deeply appreciate that question, I have to say first.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful question, because I'm going to give you the answer in 2 words, okay? And that is it. Not knowing something in today's online world, in today's normal, is not an excuse for not wanting to do the work, okay? Now, in a real life situation, if somebody doesn't know something, I give them a directive. And I say, if you don't know about it, Google it, okay? I say Google it. Now, of course, they should have access. We're talking about digital literacy. We're talking about digital equity here. Do they have access to, the internet? But that's not an excuse for saying, I don't know. Ask them some questions, engaging questions that they can Google and try to find the answers so that we can have an interactive a conversation. Don't be like Professor Mitra said, don't give them the answers. Don't learn for them. They have enough sources to go out there and find the answers themselves. And we have to be Socratic in the way we do things. We ask Socratic questions, and Socratic questions are also engaging. It challenges students to go and find the answer and tell them, you know what, well, these are the questions, you ask these questions, go and find it, come back and tell us. So that's how I do it. And there's a thing is that some students get their feathers ruffled because you're giving them work to do. But learning is work, and we shouldn't be doing the learning for them. So again, the answer very quickly is when a student says they don't know anything about the topic in today's online reality, Google it.
Thank you, sir. And just a link to the same question. Can we use the ask 3 before me technique with this student?
I didn't get that question. Could you?
We have a technique called ask 3 before me. Like before the student comes to the teacher, I always tell them, ask 3 of your friends for any of the answers that you don't know. And then come back to me with those 3 answers, and then we discuss about it. Is it okay with this?
Well, that's just what I said. Yeah,
Okay.
we can brainstorm the questions with the students, and
All right.
do a brainstorming, and we can visualize them, give them a worksheet like I showed you there, and you're going to get a copy of this, presentation. I sent that to Renew. She's going to send that to everybody who attended the webinar today. And when you have that, download the manual from it, it'll help you to understand all of those things when you put the PowerPoint presentation together and the mind maps that you get from that, and then the learning manual that I'm going to send you. It'll help you to understand how, and there's that worksheet on there that you can use to brainstorm the question. Don't give them the questions themselves. Let them come up with them, and they'll find it. Do some collaborative group work. Let them come up with it, and then we can visualize it, and that helps to. Voice and choice is integrated into that. They're the ones making the decisions. You're just guiding that. You're just facilitating that. Yes, you are the teacher, but let them feel that they're part of that. And that's going to help them to get motivated and want to do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ron. It was a really encouraging and wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wants to ask a question? Sir has already spoken about self-directed learning. We are following the pedagogy path. And yes, task-based learning is allowing child to learn by themselves. And it is something which is very close to the child that he learns. Mind mapping helps the child to think. It's a think tank. And yeah, Dr. Ron, this was really very interactive. As far as mind mapping is concerned, how to put the project-based learning put into action. That is very well explained by you. Any other questions from the participants? I had seen Nabila ma'am had raised her hand. Okay, how can we strengthen psychomotor aspect of learning among our students? How can we assess them?
Great question, because that is not something that we dealt with here. And it is not possible in a short 1 hour, because when you talk about assessment, you have to take many things into consideration. And that's why I always do a separate workshop for assessment, because, you know, it's a complicated thing, and there's different kinds of assessments. You know, we got diagnostic, formative, summative, and those are just 3. There's many more. And we got to really think about that. We had to create, you know, what works for us, what doesn't work for us, what requirements are, you know, we being forced to integrate into the learning, what curriculum are we given? All of those questions have to be answered when we actually create the assessment for itself. Now, I did give you a mind map there for reflection and assessment in a formative way during the cycle and at the end, but that's more of a verbal feedback and formative that would not lead to summative assessment. And I think what they're asking here is summative, is how do we test to see if they learned what they need to learn? And that, again, gets complicated in that answer because it is not that simple. Because when we're thinking about that, and I did say that, when you're designing this and you're working with this, you must use the methodology of backwards design, because that product should incorporate what they need to know, the skills that they need to know, and all the other things to make them feel successful in the learning. But is it something, that product, is it something that we can assess to say, yes, they're learning what they need to know. Yes, they did reach that language level. Yes, they do have those skills. And that's what TBL and PBL is about. Let us not forget that TBL and PBL is not just about language learning. It's also about skills learning and communication and the other things that we have to integrate, which sometimes is not going to happen in a course book.
Right, sir. We have to go outside the text if we want to learn something more. There's a
That's
question
right.
from Stella ma'am. It's just gone up. Yeah. She just asked a question. So you can see that question. Stella ma'am, can you, yeah. There's a question from Stella ma'am. She has asked, yeah. I can't see, but she had asked a question on using of PBL. Stella ma'am, can you unmute yourself and ask the question? I cannot see this.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Which PBL framework do you mostly prefer, as many authors give different structures or different steps to follow, and that's troublesome when actually we have to decide upon the exact steps that we have to follow during the lesson if you want to organize a PBL type of one. Thank you.
Stella, again, what a great question. And, you know, in the beginning, I said that, you know, 2 of the people who inspired me to do what I've done were Indian, okay? They were not European. They were Indian thinkers and successful educators who helped to really develop the ideas that Jane Willis presented in her book, okay? And I, as a teacher, I had to go beyond what Jane Willis, and I don't use the Jane Willis framework. I created the ready-made mind maps that we as a teacher could create for ourselves. But what doesn't change is that we do have that warm-up cycle. We do have the mind maps are the engaging questions, and that we do have a product. Please refer back to the one of the frames in the PowerPoint presentation of meaningful learning. Now, if you use those 5 points of that I pointed out there of what meaningful learning is, and you're using that as help you to design your class and design a TBL and PBL learning cycle, then you're doing it right. And you create that own framework. Let us not forget, as somebody else says, let us also not forget what comes after the product, and that's assessment, which we didn't talk about today. And Ranu, if you want, you can invite me back and we can talk about that.
Yes. Yes.
So
Okay, I've got it. So
Stella, did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. So the idea is that the start counts very much. I mean, the point that we start from and the product, the final product, actually. So the steps that follow one after each other is up to the teacher.
What you share with the students is either the mind map that you created with them or the one that you created for yourself. I ask you again to use my models. I give them away to teachers all over the world. You can have access to them from this PowerPoint presentation and together with the learning manual that you get. Renu, were you able to put that link into the chat box?
No, I did not do that.
I can actually get that real quick. I actually had it here. Let me just get that because I would like to put that into the chat box. Is that link that you need to actually get to that? Not that one, okay. I'm going to give you a link in the chat box that you can go to, sign up for that book, and you will instantly get it as a PDF. Fantastic document to have together with the PDF you'll get from the PowerPoint presentation today. Let me just get to that real quick here. Okay, going to put that into the chat box. Okay, it's coming in just a second.
We are waiting.
A little bit of patience here. And here it goes. It's in the chat box. Please go to that internet site right there. You can quickly sign up and get that PDF. Renu's going to send you the mind maps. And together,
Yes.
as I said, you will be able to tomorrow, okay, as soon as you read that, you will be able to start using this in your classroom immediately, okay? And don't be afraid, because remember, if it scares you and it's interesting, then you probably should be doing it. Just read up on it, use one of my models, and then eventually learn how to create them yourself, because we not only want students to be creators of content, we want our teachers to be designers of classes, and they come hand in hand. If we want students to become creators of content, and we want to get away from instructivist approaches, then we need to construct mind maps and use them as the guide, and we have to learn how to do it. And I think together with the PowerPoint that you get today and that learning manual, you can start tomorrow.
Dr. Ron, they are asking for the
We didn't get
link.
the link.
Yeah,
We
they
didn't
did not
get
get
the
the
link, Mr. Ron. We didn't get it here in the chat box.
Oh.
None of us have got it.
Let me just see that. Oh, I just sent it to everybody in the waiting room. There we go. Do you have it?
Now it's here. Now it's here.
Got
Thank
it?
you.
Sign up for it and you'll get it. It's a wonderful document. And I'm going to tell you something there. I'm proud of that because that is 20 years of research and work and experience in that document. I wrote it for non-native speakers because I wanted to remove the complicated sort of pedagogical, didactical, academic language that can confuse things and complicate it. So, you know, it took me over, well, 2 years to get it to the point where I felt good about sharing it. So I hope you enjoy it and see it as something that you can use. And I always like feedback. So if you know you got any feedback, you can always contact me on, Facebook, follow me and let me know how that's working for you.
I feel Yasin sir has a question. That will be the
okay.
last question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation and the webinar. It was wonderful, actually. So I have two questions, actually, for Mr. Rohn. Since this approach, the task-based learning, is the goal-driven and the language is secondary to the goal, I think this model is kind of flipped model for PPP, right?
Well, you know, some people say that there's that question, is TBL actually just PPP in disguise? But it's not,
Yeah.
because if you look at, you as a teacher make a decision. And what I said there is that, remember that what you don't see on the ready-made mind maps is the warm-up activity and the product. And if you choose to do PPP in the beginning, in other words, present the language, well, that might go against the principles of what TBL and PBL is about. But I have no, qualms about actually maybe introducing the topic at first, maybe a conversation, maybe showing them a video, maybe getting them to read something first to get them to get into the mood and create the language that they're going to need to feel successful.
Yeah.
So that's okay, but let us not forget that if you're doing TBL and PBL, that it's the application of the language that counts more than actually just teaching them a word list that they have to memorize, because that's not what TBL and PBL is about, memorizing vocabulary list. That's not what it's about.
Okay, but sorry. I mean, now I teach the lower level students. Most of my students are A1 and A2. They are starters and elementary. Like, how can we teach this approach? Like, because, when they come to the classroom, they don't have enough words and structure to talk about what we want to talk about. So is it possible to, like, design a kind of a different approach for the lower level students, or task-based learning can be used for all types of learners? So I'm just,
well, again, I want to repeat what I said, that age does not make a difference. Okay, you need to go to Google, get some examples for yourself. There's thousands and thousands there for you to find of what you can be using. Now, I assume that you're talking about primary school there, which is going to be first, second, third, fourth class. And there's so many there to use for A1 and A2. But A1 and A2 learners need to learn grammar and vocabulary before they can really start producing language in a spoken or written form. So, we got to use other, approaches and methods before we start using TBL and PBL, because we go back to being instructivists, okay, really instructing and doing a lot of teaching. Then we become constructivist, that what we're teaching them, that we know that we're leading them to constructing something in the end that they feel good about, that we can see that they're learning, that there's knowledge transfer going on, and by using some games or activities in the beginning, but eventually leading them to more complicated tasks, which is possible with, I don't want to say lower level learning, I just want to say primary school, young learners in first to maybe even fourth class. Because by the time they get to fourth class, they'll learn it quicker than somebody in the first or second or third class. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. It was great to participate in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, participants. And thank you, Dr. Ron, for this very informative and interactive session. Now I request Ms. Aditi Shah to give the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the members of MNET, I would like to thank Dr. Ron Morrain for volunteering his time and providing such an enlightening and entertaining presentation on the topic of task-based and project-based learning using mind maps for the new normal. Some of the key highlights of the presentation were the difference between constructivism and instructivism, the 21st century skills. Dr. Ron Morrain very nicely explained the concepts of self-direction with the help of the car example. The concept and use of mind maps was also very well explained by him with the help of relatable examples. The visual representations on the slides were also something which were very eye-catching. I would also want to appreciate the constant efforts of Mr. Nadeem Khan and INET Connect for providing the necessary technical support to MNET. Many thanks to the host and convener, Mrs. Renu Dhotre, for organizing the series of workshops through the platform of MNET. These workshops have enabled the teachers to stay updated with the latest methods and tools in varied areas of teaching, which can be utilized by them in the classroom as well as for online teaching purposes. I would like to extend our thanks to the participants from over 75 different countries, including countries such as UAE, Egypt, Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and so on. We at MNET appreciate the positive feedback obtained from all the participants over the world. We look forward to such enthusiasm from our participants in the future as well. Once again, a huge thanks to everyone and have a great evening.
Thank you, Aditi.
And
Dr.
I would
Ron,
like to thank, I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank your group for putting this together. Thank you for inviting me. I'm always pleased to meet new teachers from all over the world. And I really look forward to coming to India, especially to Mumbai, and meet you in person so that we can do a more detailed workshop and invite teachers to come in and see it for themselves. Because again, I'll repeat it. Listen to what Professor Mitra said. Don't learn for our students. Let them find the answers themselves. And if we create a positive learning environment, TBL and PBL is the way to do it, to lead students to new knowledge and new skills, because that's what our job is as teachers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ron. Thank you, participants.
At the end of it, I would just like to put across, and if you could help us with the PPTs sending us, and that would be really great for us. Mr. Ron Morrain.
Yeah, that is, Renu is going to send that to the participants.
Okay.
And I did send that to Renu. She has it.
Yes, I have got it.
And she'll send it to you. And like I said, together with the learning manual for this webinar that I share with all teachers to understand some of the theory and some of the wonderful effects that come from TBL and PBL. I share that with you, download that, and together you're ready to go and become a soldier in the classroom for TBL and PBL.
Yeah, that's very nice and kind of you, Mr. Ron Morrain, and it will really going to assist us in the long run as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I request the participants to subscribe the YouTube channel and even come to my Facebook page. Dr. Ron is already there. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, participants.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
सेशन संपलं 2-4 वेबिनार मी मिस केला आल्यानंतर मध्ये रोज नसते हे ऐकलं तर आपलंच नाही युट्यूबवर आम्हाला ते ह्याच्यात ना लिंक नाही अजून तर आम्हाला तर काय आलं नाही एक मिनिट जरासं ते ह्याचं बघते.
Hello. Hello there. When is the next session, please? Your next session, when? Hello.
It will be on the next Wednesday. Next Wednesday.
Same time?
Yeah, same time, 4 to 5.
Are there any registration form or things like this?
Yes, it will be there. I'll float it. Next
We-
week. It will be on assessment, online assessment.
Online assessment. Okay. I'll try to send you my email to just communicate with me. Thank you.
Yes.